This is JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So welcome back, friends. It's always good to have you alongside. What would JCT be without you? I'd be talking into the air. But with the camera there, I'm looking right into your eyes, and it's always a personal connection from my side, at least. We're in the book of Mark, and we're right in the midst of one of the most interesting stories about Jesus when he walked on the water, that famous one. And we'll get right to it after this break. You know, friends, it's an urgent time we're living in right now with the COVID-19 crisis, where it seems the whole world is locking down. And I just want you to know that there is not only a biblical perspective on all of this, but there's also just something that needs to be said. It's simply this, that God is sovereign, He is omniscient, and He has factored all things, good and bad, into His plan. I want to direct you to two websites, wowmission.com and also jimcantelontoday.com. There, for the next several weeks, I'm going to be doing some teaching on righteousness and justice and the COVID-19 crisis. It'll be purely biblical. It's something you'll want to watch. wowmission.com, jimcantelontoday.com. I'll be looking for you. Kind of left you hanging last program because we just got into the story of Jesus walking on the water, and we had to stop midway. So let's pick it up at the beginning in verse 47 of Mark chapter 6. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them, said to them, Be of good cheer, it is I, don't be afraid. Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled. For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. Now, when they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. Now, just to review, Jesus and the disciples, who were totally worn out from ministry, had tried to escape the crowd and had gone across the lake from Capernaum area to a desert place, as they called it, but basically wilderness, at the foot of the Golan Heights on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The people had seen where they were headed, had run around. People from other villages, seeing the commotion, had joined them, and they were waiting for Jesus and the disciples when they landed at the shore. And Jesus, instead of being angry with them, was moved with compassion because they looked like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them. And then the disciples said, but they need food. It's almost evening. Send them into the town so they can get food or go back to their homes. And Jesus said, no, you feed them. And so we dealt with the story of the feeding of the 5,000, as it's called. Jesus sends the disciples back to the boat, go over to Bethsaida, I'll get rid of the crowd, and then I got to spend some time alone. That's basically what happened. And it went fairly well, except for the fact that the wind was blowing from the northeast against the boat. Bethsaida was on the northeast coast of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum was on the northwest coast of the Sea of Galilee. Next to Capernaum and Tabgha, where the there's a lovely little, I was going to say shrine, it's not a shrine, it's a little chapel these days that remembers the feeding of the 5,000, is what's called the plain of Gennesaret, the region of Gennesaret. It's kind of a flat plain. Right now it's all banana groves. but it's very, very flat and beautiful. And then the Upper Galilee springs up from there. Anyway, they're trying to get to Bethsaida. The wind from the northeast is blowing against them. They're rowing because of that northeast wind, and the wind is blowing them away from Bethsaida back towards Capernaum and Gennesaret. Jesus is watching from the top of the Golan Heights, and I've stood there many times. You can stand, you see the whole lake below you. It's big, but it's not big. It's certainly not a sea. Maybe 12 miles long and maybe 6 miles wide. To be more accurate, it may be 12 kilometers long and 6 kilometers wide. I think that's more accurate, but point being, you can see the whole thing there. It's shaped like a harp. That's why the Israelis call it kinneret, which means harp. I draw you a picture, but I'm not very good at pictures. Anyhow, Jesus sees that they're in trouble, and Mark, doesn't give us all the detail. I mean, Peter is telling him the story as he remembered it. Jesus suddenly appears out on the lake, scares the daylights out of the disciples. They figure he's a ghost. And Jesus says, "Don't be afraid, it's me." And he gets in the boat with them. As soon as he does this, the water calms, and they carry on. The wind at that point had blown them off course, and they just continued on the new course over toward Gennesaret. All right? Are you with me? A lot of detail there. All right, let's by the way, it also mentions it was the which watch of the night? Fourth watch of the night, right there, okay? That means probably between 3 and 6 a.m. in the morning, just in case you're wondering. Let's move on. It says, they were amazed in themselves, verse 51, beyond measure, and marveled. They're amazed beyond measure. It means they were totally astonished, not only at Jesus walking on the water, but at the sea suddenly calming when he got on the boat. But they hadn't understood about the loaves, Mark says. Their hearts were hard. It's hard to imagine this. I mean, they had just witnessed this miraculous feeding of the 5,000. More like 10,000, counting the women and children. They'd seen it with their own eyes. They'd picked up, 12 backpacks full of stuff, mainly food afterwards. I mean, they saw it with their own eyes. And their hearts are hardened? Why? We harden our hearts sometimes because of disappointment. We harden our hearts because we're angry. Often people who encounter some great tragedy in their lives blame God and are bitter and resentful for the rest of their lives because it's all God's fault. We harden our hearts for maybe a number of reasons, but we can also harden our hearts because there's something that has occurred that we don't want to admit to, or we don't want to accept. We have the capacity to harden our hearts. So you can have a bald-faced miracle right there and refuse to accept it. Refuse to believe the implications. Now, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis's Narnia Chronicles. And if you haven't read Narnia Chronicles, you need to read them. It's a series of children's stories, but oh man, so profound. And in the last book, The Last Battle it's called, he's got some dwarves in a little hut of a false prophet. And Narnia, this heaven-like land, is right there at the edge of the doorway to the hut. And the children, the heroes, are going to enter into Narnia just so easily. The dwarves, however, are really angry that they've been deceived by this false prophet. They didn't want to believe in the first place, and they had every opportunity to go into Narnia. It was right there. All they had to do was walk through that door, and they refused. There was every opportunity, and they said no. They said, the dwarves is for the dwarves. We're sticking right here. We know what we got here. We don't know what we're going to get there. Have you ever been like that? I've been like that. We just simply harden our hearts. I don't know how else to explain this. I really don't. So they'd harden their hearts. And because they'd hardened their hearts, They were missing it. So many times in the history of Jesus' life and ministry, the disciples came close to losing it, losing touch with him, losing faith in him. Even after the resurrection, you remember? Jesus calls them up to this very area in the northern Galilee. Come and meet me there. He's resurrected now. And Matthew tells us they went up, some of them still doubting, even after the resurrection. We have such a capacity, friends, to harden our hearts. Anyway, they had understood about the loaves, their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. As I say, Gennesaret is the northwest of the Sea of Galilee. It's a fertile plain between Tiberias and Capernaum. It's a lovely area, and it's the southern edge of Gennesaret. They've just been uncovering now another seaport town similar to Capernaum called Magdala. It's gorgeous. I was there recently, and they're just now, the archaeologists, working on the ruins of an old synagogue there. But it was a commercial fishing center, as was Capernaum. And it's sort of at the southern edge of Gennesaret, and then you go around the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum, and Gennesaret is right in that region between Capernaum and Magdala, and then Tiberias is right next to Magdala. Okay. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him. Sure they would. Ran through that whole surrounding region, began to carry about on beds those who were sick, to wherever they heard he was. I mean, only Jesus could have handled this. I couldn't handle this, nor could you. Wherever he entered, villages, cities, country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces, begged him they might just touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched him were made well. Then the Pharisees and some of the scribes came together to him, having come from Jerusalem, and now when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. Can you believe this? For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they don't eat unless they wash. And there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, couches. And the Pharisees and scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands?" He answered and said to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it's written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do." I really have to deal with this after the break, because this is pretty heavy stuff. We're getting an insight here into the religious culture of Jesus' day. And believe me, it was pushback city. Everything Jesus said and did was an offense to them, and they wanted nothing to do with him. They wanted nothing to do with his disciples. They looked for every opportunity to diss them, and eventually they tried to kill him. And as we know, eventually they succeeded. Back with more after this.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
So we're in chapter 7 now. I read it before the break. But essentially what you have here is a segment from Mark where the Pharisees, the religious establishment, are trying to finesse the Almighty. Anyway, Here you have some nitpicking Pharisees. Now, I need to be fair. Pharisees were God-fearing, Bible-respecting, raising their children in the nurture of the Lord kind of people. In fact, I've often said, and sometimes people's eyes wide when I say it in a church context, a lot of us present-day believers are sort of modern-day Pharisees. We have an established religious worldview. We have our way of doing things. And of course, our way of doing things is always the right way of doing things. Goes without question. And when people either don't conform or disagree, we find fault. I mean, it is ever thus, right? Well, the Pharisees, prushim in the Hebrew, basically means they were the interpreters of the scriptures. They had taken upon themselves that responsibility. And there was a whole centuries-long tradition of interpretation of the scriptures that was referred to as the oral law. The oral law eventually was written down a few hundred years later into what's now known as the Talmud. At that point, it wasn't written. There was something being written called the Mishnah, which comprised a part of the Talmud eventually. But it, was the traditions of men. Now, I have to explain this to you. It wasn't that the rabbis were trying to be legalists. I mean, they were, but they weren't trying to be legalists. Their motives were pure in their minds. Here you had the law of Moses, which was 613 laws. The Ten Commandments are only a summary of sort of the core values of the law of Moses. You've got 1,613 laws, every opportunity to transgress one of those 613. So in order to protect you from transgressing the law, what we will do for you is we will build a fence or a hedge around the law. That hedge will protect you from crossing into the dangerous territory of the law where for sure you're going to transgress. So what will this hedge or this fence be comprised of? It will be comprised of laws that we make up, that relate to the Mosaic law, but are not the Mosaic law per se. The problem was that as this fence was built, the fence eventually took on, or the hedge took on, the same biblical authority as the 613 laws. It's ever thus, okay? Some of you know from your upbringing, if you're raised in a fairly strict church, that some of the strict rules and regulations, which you now realize were just simply man-made, had biblical authority. And they were presented to you and taught to you as if they were from the Bible itself. And if you transgress those laws, man, you were breaking taboo, basically. A lot of you were there. I was there. I understand this. Okay. So, the Pharisees interpreted the law, and they interpreted the oral law, and they presented it to the people. And as Jesus will say on another occasion, they laid heavy burdens on the people with their man-made rules and regulations. He says on one occasion, rules that you yourselves don't keep. Okay. But people were under the heavy weight of these man-made laws and traditions. So these were the Pharisees, and so now they're nitpicking, on the basis of a law that they've created or that they've inherited as created by former interpreters of the law about washing hands before eating. Okay, they were compulsive about it. Now, I'm all for washing hands. It's a good thing, but in so doing, they were avoiding another law that related to the care of parents. Okay. Let's read it again. Jesus, let me find it here. Oh yeah, here it is. Jesus says, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is korban, that is, a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down. What was the law of God? Honor your father and mother. The Pharisees didn't want to honor their father and mother. It was too time intensive, too cost intensive. They didn't want to care for their parents in their old age. So instead of caring for their parents, the money that they would have spent on caring for their parents, they gave as a gift to God. And because of their oral tradition, the gift to God took precedence over caring for their parents. Jesus just, he just says, this is what you're doing. So, you're making a big fuss about my disciples eating food with unwashed hands, while you yourselves are skirting the very significant law about the care of your parents, and you're rationalizing that neglect of your parents by saying it's a gift to God. There's a word in Old English for that action of rationalizing. It's called casuistry. You'll never hear it used, but I just thought you'd find that interesting. As if God can be finessed. So there's God. Oh, thank you for this gift to me. You think he's going to be blind to the fact that you're ignoring your parents and you're using this gift to me as an excuse to ignore your parents? As a way of avoiding the care of your parents? Jesus says, come on, this isn't going to work. God cannot be finessed that way. He cannot be deceived. Because ultimately, it's what comes out of a person that is what defiles them. It's not eating food with dirty hands. He says, look, hear me and understand. There's nothing that enters a man from outside that can defile him, but the things which come out of him, these are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. When he'd entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him? Because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods. He said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of man, proceed all evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. Now, any Pharisee that was listening to this conversation would be totally offended because they were so concerned about the laws of kashrut, kosher laws, food cleanliness laws. This was a whole issue with the eating with unwashed hands. Okay. A direct blow to kosher law. It was also a direct blow and offense to oral law, to oral tradition. See, the thing is, friends, instead of giving the Pharisees a hard time, let's look at ourselves. We too are capable of honoring God with our lips. We too can be good talkers. We know the dogma, we know the teaching. Some of us have memorized a lot of stuff. But as you read this passage, you got to ask yourself the question, is it I? Am I one of these guys? Am I doing an end run around what I know is right by purporting to do something of greater righteousness than doing the righteous act itself? For instance, I'll make a large gift to that ministry to the poor. I mean, they can use the money and look at all those poor people they're dealing with. And you're ignoring the needs of your infirm mother who needs help. It's going to cost a lot of money to bring someone in to help her. See, we rationalize our end runs around duty, and we cover ourselves by doing other good work. Now, that sounds all negative, and I know that it's not true of most of us, but the point is we have the capacity to fool ourselves that way and to actually think we can fool God that way. I've been pastoring for many years, and man, I could curl your hair with stories I know, but just like doctor-patient confidentiality, I don't even share with my wife what I have learned about various people in my churches over the years. It's between them and me and the Lord. Okay, and I'm not going to betray any confidences now. But I will say this, that I have known some situations where people are ruining their lives with sinful behavior But on the outside, their hands are clean. They wash their hands. They know the language. They can say all the right words. They know which buttons to push. They know how to look sanctimonious and holy. And everyone's fooled. But the Lord. This is a stern word from Jesus. You focus on the outside, the clean hands and all that kind of stuff. God looks on the heart. This was a lesson, of course, that goes right back to the time of Samuel. Man looks on the outward appearance, God looks on the heart. How is your heart? How is it with your heart? Forget about the outward show of things. How is it with the inside? That's where defilement comes from, and that's where salvation happens. Jesus says it's the stuff inside that defiles you. Let the blood of Jesus Christ cleanse you from all sin and enter into fellowship with him. That's the call of Jesus, a call that we all have to respond to.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
On the program, friends, you see these promotions for WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, and without apology or any embarrassment, I want to encourage you to support that work. It's work we're doing, of course, but it's work that's far beyond me. It has to do with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers on the ground, African volunteers from hundreds of churches who are caring for thousands of orphans and widows. And specifically, we're working right now in South Africa, in Zambia, in Malawi, and in the area of Chennai in southern India. The need is so humongous. As the official voice of WOW here on JCT, I try to add value by exposing the gospel to you, but I also want to add value by giving you the opportunity to support this terrific work that's going on with the least of these. So do your best. Send your best gift. God bless you. See you next time.